All right. Welcome, everyone in the room live and on the webinar, watching virtually. My name is Jennifer Dill. I am the director of the Transportation Research and Education Center here at Portland State University, and I'm going to be introducing and moderating today's seminar. So our PSU transportation seminars have been a tradition since the year 2000. These seminars are once again being held live on Portland State University's urban campus, located on the ancestral homelands of the Multnomah, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Tumwater, and Watlala bands of the Chinook, the Tualatin Kalapuya, and many other indigenous nations of the Columbia River. It is important that we acknowledge that we are here because of the sacrifices forced upon the indigenous ancestors of this place, remember these communities, and honor their legacy, lives, and descendants. Today, we're very pleased to have Joe Totten presenting on Forest Service engineering lessons and opportunities. Joe Totten is an engineer with the U.S. Department of Agriculture Forest Service. He has worked in municipal government, state government, a transit system, and as a Peace Corps volunteer teaching middle school. He holds a bachelor's degree from the University of Minnesota and a master's degree from Portland State University. His research focuses on accessibility and transit. And before I pass it over to Joe, I want to give a preview of a couple upcoming seminars. We have one from Cassie Wilson, another PSU alum who's currently working for 1,000 Friends of Oregon. This was a rescheduled seminar from 2 weeks ago on Friday. So it's a Friday transportation seminar, but it's happening on a Thursday. So we hope many of you will be able to join us for that. And then on May 31st, we have Professor Bruce Appleyard, who will be talking about livable streets. So we hope to see many of you in person and virtually for that. Quick overview of today's seminar. You can expect our speaker to speak for about 40 minutes, followed by Q&A. And if you are watching us virtually, put your questions in the Q&A box on your screen. I will be monitoring those and sharing them with our speaker during Q&A, along with questions live from the room. If we run out of time for questions, we do always send them to our speaker afterwards so that they see what the questions were and have an opportunity, but they can't always answer, so I can't promise anything. We have enabled closed captioning, but you must click on the closed caption feature on your control panel to view them. We are recording today's webinar. It will be available on the TREC website later on today if you want to share it with colleagues or friends or watch it again, etc. Also, the slides are usually shared. And if you're tracking professional development hours, eligible for 1 hour of continuing education credit. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Joe.
Good. Hi, everybody. I'm Joe. So yeah, this is my presentation on Forest Service engineering, how it's been different, and opportunities and lessons learned. So just to give us a quick outline, we're going to talk about myself, my favorite topic, the Forest Service general, just quick history hits, and then we're going to be talking about the type of transportation engineering we do in the Forest Service. Moving on, then we're going to talk about my job, just again, kind of quick hits, and kind of then open up into that sort of more question and answer or kind of group discussion portion of what lessons do I think can be learned into municipal when I was there, what I could take from my current job, and hopefully get some feedback from you all as well. So, hi, I'm Joe. We did this already. Thank you. So I work for the U.S. Department of Agriculture Forest Service. You'll notice that we are the United States Department of Agriculture. We are the only U.S. land management agency not in the Bureau of Interior. Everybody else, BLM, Bureau of Indian Affairs, fish and wildlife are all in interior national parks. And that is because we are also in the business of growing crops. We grow trees. So this was first set aside, our very beginning of history was the 1891 Forest Reserves. And then we were reorganized in 1905 with Theodore Roosevelt. So you'll see that the mission here is sustain the health, diversity, and productivity of the nation's forests and grasslands to meet the needs of present and future generations. So we have a multi-pronged, multifaceted mission there to make sure that we are serving a lot of different needs and around. We're split into regions. So I work for the Pacific Northwest here in Portland. That's just Oregon and Washington. You'll see that we go up to 10. We're missing number 7. It used to be that 7 and 9 used to be split. Now they are together throughout the entire Northeast and Midwest. In Region 6, we have a lot of forests, but we also have some other land features that we manage. The Columbia River Gorge is predominantly managed by Forest Service, one of the leading partners there with Multnomah Falls and those facilities as well. Mount St. Helens and the Newberry National Volcanic Monuments are in Region 6, as is the Crooked River National Grassland. So more than just trees. So the one thing that I had when I came into Forest Service, I was asking the question of, okay, why do you need a transportation engineer? Trees don't drive. Like, what are we doing out here? What are we engineering? And so one of the things, and the big one that's coming up right now a lot, is that we're redesigning our culverts. We're putting them in as more arch structures instead of just straight pipes or maybe squash pipes, so that fish can travel up the culvert and reach spawning habitat higher up the mountains, higher up the hills, higher up the streams. This is part of also putting more money into our roads, resurfacing our roads and making sure that we're not polluting our streams with additional sedimentation. So making sure that we're protecting those natural habitats. We're also balancing the needs of recreation, public access, as well as our administrative access, our fire needs, with the needs of industrial production, of even conservation needs and goals. So our roads might be really disturbing to certain species. And even as far as mining, making sure that there's access out there that we can know what minerals might be on our forests. So we need to make sure that we're balancing all these needs, which include the needs of having land without road. Now, the biggest thing anybody will do, no one is going to tell you this about, hey, come work for PMOT, we work in maintenance. But no, I'm going to tell you this, we're doing the same thing. The big thing on forest is that almost all of our maintenance is going to be drainage related. So you'll see in the upper right there, we have, probably shouldn't have said that strongly, but on the upper right there, we have, for example, this clogged ditch and culvert. So the water's been flowing over the top of the road, and that's really going to be more damaging to that surface more quickly. So we have people out there who are going to try and pull that ditch, get the gunk out of it so that we can continue that water flowing and keep going under the road where we know where it's going and where we want to keep it. On the further down, you'll see that we have a lot of forests that are in the mountains, or at least in big hills. And so we'll have these rock slides on our roads. We can't just carry the rocks and throw them off the other side, that'll hit something else. So we can't just leave them in the ditch, that's going to lead to those drainage issues. So where do we put the rock? And if we don't solve some of these problems, you end up getting a storm here, and that used to be a trail. The trail is now in the river. So we end up moving it and having to put these things back on the mountain, to making sure that they're secure. So this is my first pop quiz. I promise there won't be many of these, but I took from the Oregon State Mileage Report, the mileages for ODOT, all Oregon County cities, and USDA Forest Service in Oregon alone. And there's 2 up here, I will admit, 2 of them are for Forest Service, so there's an extra mileage. But take a second, take a minute, think which one is more likely for which.
Oh, we're supposed to match them up?
Yeah, sorry, we have a matching game, so they're not
Okay.
they're not actually in order right now. They're scrambled.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Where are they?
I think they're all scrambled.
Okay.
So we got basic guesses, maybe?
I guess the Forest Service is the 5,600, that's my guess.
I'm gonna guess Forest Service is 11,000.
Okay, we got some. You're kind of right. Forest Service is the 5,600, but that's our level 3 and above roads. So we have different maintenance levels where we define our roads, and level 3 is where we will design it so that more or less any passenger vehicle should be able to get through. And we're not giving you a lot of comfort on those roads. There might be some potholes that you have to avoid, but you don't have to be in a truck. You don't have to be in a lifted vehicle. You don't have to be in anything special. You could get through that with your smart car or your Prius. If we're going with roads that we say are open to the public and that it's legal for you to drive on, that's our 42,000 number. So we are out there maintaining, if we're just talking about, again, roads that we think, hey, you can get through this with anything, we're maintaining the same number of road miles as ODOT. And if we're taking just what is open to the public, we have more than all Oregon counties and almost as much as all Oregon counties and cities put together. So we got a massive amount of miles out there. That doesn't even include, we close a lot of our roads when they're not in use. We will plant them, make sure that there's not erosion happening down them. So if there's a road that's not leading to specific recreation, maybe it's used more for timber haul or something else, we have 22,000 miles in just Oregon of roads that are closed and in storage, not decommissioned. They're gonna be back open at some point, but for now, they're closed. We also have the most road miles of any land management agency in Oregon, more than BLM. Parks is usually pretty small, but especially with just Crater Lake, you can see that as well. So on all those roads, we got a lot of bridges. This is on the High Steel Bridge on the Olympic National Forest in Washington. Super cool over a really pretty gorge. Recommend going there, but we got to go and inspect them once every 2 years on most bridges. We got to make sure that we're going under them, looking at them, and checking for any structural defects or risks to the public that we might need to address. When we don't end up doing things, or if we just get a big enough storm, this was a road here that you can kind of see the road prism up here and over there. It is all washed out. That culvert isn't supposed to have a bend in it. It was straight and it got washed under so much that it fell. So we are putting back these emergency repairs with federal highways and with our partners on the forests. We're designing still roads and bridges. I remember when I was an undergrad, my highways professor told me how much she wished she was an engineer in the 50s and 60s when you could design, cast, and fill. And I then went to Portland State, so there were some different feelings there, but we're still building roads out here. We're still looking at where are we going to be putting this borrow? Where do we need this borrow? We're also addressing road safety. And so if we're looking at road safety, what are the differences between an urban road and a rural road or a production road? So when we're out here, one of the big things that we do is we look at for hazard trees. Clearly, any tree could fall. It's kind of luck of the draw. So we don't want to just cut a giant swath through the forest. Instead, we want to go out there and see which trees have an imminent risk of failure and are posing that risk to the traveling public and to our roadways. And we might go out there and have people mitigate those by taking off parts of the dead tree or actually felling the tree and putting it away from the road so that it won't come down and strike a vehicle or a person. Like in any management agency, we need to have our data. So we are out there putting out traffic counters on mountain bike trails, on OHV trails, on our roads, and just making sure that we are spending our money in efficient ways and justifying this to others. Anybody's first job in engineering, you're probably going to be doing your construction management out there for our timber sales, for any of our projects. And road management, as we talked about with those closed roads, sometimes we're opening and closing roads for the public. That can happen for a lot of different reasons. Sometimes, unlike the road over Siskiyou, they have the Port Orford cedar root rot. So they might have seasonal closures on their roads in wet season to make sure they're not spreading that fungus on their tires. But we also have, whenever there's a company going to be hauling wood products or other forest products on our road, we make them get a permit so that we can make sure that we're collecting enough money to maintain our roads. The Forest Service does not get gas taxes. So we are sitting here making sure that when someone's hauling on our roads, they're doing enough work to put that road back and not just damaging it or side casting all the gravel. And finally, it's kind of beyond our transportation, which is about the same size. If you are looking at this, sorry, this is at some level a recruitment slide. So if you are saying, hey, this kind of looks fun, but I don't know if I want to be only in transportation, don't worry. You'll be probably given jobs if you're on a unit for habitat restoration, which will involve surveying, which will involve doing the as-builts of the construction, making sure that we're putting those logs into the stream appropriately to make those cascading pools that are going to be a better habitat, and trying to make sure that we're mitigating our activities on forests as humans. We have more and more wildfire coming up, and as fire happens, overall, we don't really put fire out by dropping water on it. It's a very helpful tool. It's a very helpful strategy, but it's really, there's a lot of fuel, and just dumping water is going to slow it down, but it's really not going to be able to stop it. What we do is we actually are digging trenches and clearing out fuel breaks. So as you now have this fire that has burned over some of these fuel breaks, maybe stopped at one of them, how do you make sure that there's no erosion running down that fuel break? Well, we have engineers going out there, putting in down wood, putting in other things to try and get that erosion and get it cooling so that we're not polluting our streams with more sediment and more runoff on our forests. We do support ourselves and our communities with timber sales and with logging. So we have to make sure that all of our roads, bridges, culverts are ready to accept that logging when we have a timber sale in the area, as well as doing the construction management with that timber company to make sure that they are maintaining the road appropriately. And a lot of times it's those engineers that are even, accepting orders for cables, fire pits, other things out there on the forests, or maintaining the roads within campgrounds, within those recreation areas. And this is actually the fun, cool one. Timberline Lodge is ours as well. It's leased out. But so we just got a new pool put in up there. And every month, somebody at the regional office was reporting on his inspections of the Timberline pool and hot tub and giving us how that was going. So there's a lot of really cool things. There's ropeways engineers. I didn't know that was a thing until I started working at the Forest Service. And the last one, and the one that is really cool for me here, we have working with a lot of other agencies. USAID doesn't have a ton of engineers in it. So when they're recommending how to reach a place in a rural developing part of the world that was hit by a natural disaster, they're using our road design guides. And we actually prepared design guides specifically for them that are using Forest Service experience, as well as we have our Mountain Hood multimodal transportation plan that we are working with in conjunction with ODOT, Clackamas County, like a lot of people out there, but we own a lot of the recreation. We're a lot of the places that people are being drawn to. So we are one of the lead partners in that as well. So there was my breath, kind of what will you be doing? Now let's get a little bit more depth. Let's walk through a project. So we have to create our transportation plans. And we need to make sure that we are serving and giving appropriate access to all portions of the forest. So we have multiple values. Again, we have that mission statement to sustain the health, diversity, and productivity of the nation's forests and grasslands to meet the needs of present and future generations. But this also means that we kind of have these goals that are economic, ecological, and social. So how do we use all these values, all these goals, this recreation, conservation, industry, more, and we want to make sure that we're meeting all these while minimizing damage to the landscape, minimizing harassment of various competing kind of uses, and maintaining those conflicts and controlling those conflicts, not maintaining. So how do we end up balancing these uses on the landscape? And does this always just mean to minimize road miles, just get rid of it? No, not always. We actually have to work through, we don't want to keep an excessive number of roads, but there are times when we might be asking people to share and people not to share. So when we're hit with these kind of questions, in our transportation plan, if we have some roads or a road network where we want to have use in that area by timber and by recreation, be a snowmobile route, a hiking route, ATV route, we're going to start considering mixed uses on the roads. So just like in city and urban transportation planning, but now we're kind of looking at, these are very different areas, these are very different environments. So there's not as much of a hit that, oh, I should be watching out for bicycles as there might be on a bike boulevard or a neighborhood greenway. So we're kind of looking at that, doing that analysis to see if those mixed uses can coexist. If they can't, then we move on, and that's where we start to see, maybe we should have a second road segment that connects that portion that can't, and we kind of bump the trail off the road for just that part that we think is not as safe. Maybe it's temporal. We'll see places where, you know, we have those winter recreation routes for snowmobiling, for cross-country skiing, and then once the snow melts, maybe we can use it for timber harvesting. Or maybe there are some places, this is going to be happening out on some out in the east, I know, that we have snowmobile routes, but also they're supposed to be harvesting in the winter because they want to make sure that there's snow on the ground and they're not letting sparks from their equipment ignite a fire. So once every 20 years, maybe, we might have to close the snowmobile route to allow for the timber haul. That kind of can get iffy and awkward. Is that something that we're going to allow ourselves to do once every 20 years? And so as we kind of go through all those questions, one of them will probably end up being a yes. So, and that's kind of how we end up getting towards our solution of, do we need a second road network? Do we need to use other solutions here to separate those mixed uses? And so every square here, this is from our motor vehicle use map. That's our MVM. It's our legal where you can drive in the forest. Every square here, especially in the middle, is a square mile. And you can see that these two, they're not quite at the same scale. I just took screenshots, sorry. But they are within 5 miles of each other in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. That's just across the Columbia River here in Washington. And you can see the difference in road densities. That here, every square mile might not even be touched by road. Whereas out here, we have lots of spurs, lots of other areas that we are, you know, getting a lot more road service to. And it's not that one of these areas is wrong. Everything is always going to be looking different, because what values and what these different areas can do to support those competing uses and goals is going to end up being reflected in that plan and in those road networks. So that would be kind of how we sketch out where roads need to be, how many roads need to be in an area. But past that, before we can get to building or maintaining the roads, we need to continue to ask more and more questions. So this is kind of then back into that depth that we're going to be asking, how do we protect against damage? We're quite often in the mountains out here in Oregon or in California. So how are we going to protect against that damage and keep that road on the mountain instead of sliding off? How are we going to design the roads to reach higher elevations? I've seen some timber companies say, hey, this road is going to be at 18% grade. That is steep. So we might not design that. We might put in switchbacks instead, but that's more road miles. That's more ground disturbance that we're getting. So we're disturbing more land, but it might be easier to keep that road from adding more and more runoff into the creek. Sedimentation, there we go. What type of surface will be the most resilient? We don't have the budget to pave every road in the forest. When you're in the forest, you're going to be on dirt and gravel, some paved, but we don't have the budget to pave everything. So what's going to stay there best? What's going to sediment the least? How are we going to make this so that it can stay where it is? And where I come in more often is, do we even own the land? Is it even possible for us to get there legally? And so these are, we're not going to go through and fully answer, but these have been just the questions that we start asking once we've made that basic sketch of the plan. The other one, this is my love for traffic engineering. So on the Forest Service road, we're probably not seeing traffic lights. Trees don't drive. We're not having that many people out here, not that high of traffic. we're probably gonna be seeing much more no traffic sign, my personal favorite, or the Ford sign. That's not warning that there's no Chevrolets in that area. No, that is the stream crossings that you have to just drive through, right? So when we have these conditions on our roads, we can't find this in the MUTCD. We can't find this in the typical standards. So we actually have an entire second national standard. Traffic pole, take notes. Engineering Manual 7100-15. And so that really then helps us guide and ask those questions in our sign and poster guide for what level of signage is appropriate and what hazards are you more likely to encounter on the forests. So when we're asking that level of signage, one piece to consider is what are we assuming? There's that one viral photo, I think in like Florida, where it's technically not an interstate, so they have a no parking sign every 30 feet down the interstate. And is that should be assumed maybe? Maybe because it's not legally an interstate, they have to put that there. But if we were to put curb ahead sign or deer warning signs, we would be just plastering the entire forest with just deer signs. So we really do have to be considering, hey, these people should kind of be aware that they're on a Forest Service road. This is wildlife's habitat. We can't give them every warning that this is a duck crossing and that's a deer crossing. But we still do need to warn them for those curves. For sometimes there are places where wildlife is much more likely to cross in. So we're going to be giving more warnings for curves, roadway conditions, maybe even wildlife. But we're probably not going to be doing anything for the congestion. We might have some intersection control with yield or stop signs, but even that can be really sparse out on our Forest Service roads. So now we get to my job. So I am the Shared Road Systems Specialist for Region 6. Why does my job exist? It's because in the 1800s, the United States government wanted to encourage western whiteward settlement expansion. And they gave the railroads half the land near their main line. So the railroad would build the main line, they would get half the land, and then they were supposed to sell that land to settlers so that they would be able to build in the customer base for the future, and they'd be able to use the proceeds from the sales to finance more construction. Unfortunately, they decided that the way that they should do this is in a checkerboard. So if you've ever imagined maybe how would you design a road system on a checkerboard, it's really hard to design a road system for white squares that never ever touches a black square. And it's really hard to do the opposite as well. You're going to have to cross each other at some point. This pattern of ownership has continued to today. It still is out there, and quite often the areas aren't usually like cabins and settlements, but it's much more commonly timber companies that are interspersed with the Forest Service for large tracts of land. So we serve that entire area with one road network, and we just kind of share with the timber companies. We try and make sure that everybody pays their fair share, everybody does their fair amount of work for how much they're using the road and how much land is served by it. And that's under the Forest Roads and Trail Act of 1963 and cost share. So I gave myself 3 slides to do what is normally a 4.5-hour training. Please excuse me. We end up with this act, we give each other easements, so that they're true, real property rights. They're something that you can record at the county. It's the same as if you're owning something, but you're only owning it for a purpose. So we're giving each other easement rights for roads. And we are doing that by paying each other with either through the balance sheets of the agreements or outright. And we determine how much we owe because they're not just giving us an easement. We're also giving them an easement. We're sharing these roads entirely. So we have to figure out what percent of the road everybody takes custody for. And what percent of the road is everybody would be responsible for. So we have these agreements with these large landowners, such as the timber companies, who provide that access. And overall, this agreement, it's always going to be different. Every time you're looking at a road, some's going to be weird. Some's going to be really strange about that road. So really, these are agreements to agree. We're just gonna keep talking and keep figuring this out until sometimes everybody looks at it and says, oh, yeah, that's about right. And so I'm looking at, for example, that percent share and that percent ownership. This is a map up on the Olympic, and so this is my how. We're going to estimate how this land is going to be accessed. And because we're working normally with timber companies, we're kind of looking at, if I were to cut a tree right here, how would that get to the public road network? If it was right here, how would it get to the public road network? And we're drawing these lines around to try and estimate how are we going to end up getting these products to market. So we're using that existing roads in the area. So you'll see over here in pink, this is a county road. So everything gets pretty narrow as it gets close to there, because we would just harvest straight to the county road. We just make a landing right here. Whereas if it's down here, we're going to go up on this road and trace all the way back. So all this land is part of our percent share to the rest of the road network. Then we have to ask ourselves what uses are in that area. So we've drawn our boundary of where, if we were to cut a tree, it would go this way. What uses are there? If we're in wilderness, we can't send anybody with a chainsaw in there. You can't have a motor in the wilderness. So we decide that actually, we weight all of our acres. And this is a spotted owl habitat. We cannot log this. We kind of put that to a very, very low percentage and weight of that acreage. Similar with wilderness, we actually put that all the way to 0. That's a congressional delegation. We are not going to ever change that. So we end up weighting all these acres, blending them together, and that's the smoothie that we kind of determine who owns what and what is the entire percent share of each road network and area. Once we've got that done, we then start looking at, okay, how was this road first built? Who built it? What's the history on it? What are their easement rights? What's the design of it? Is it going to be open to the public moving forward? How are we all going to maintain it together? And we write anywhere from 12 to 15 bullet points, more or less, on this, get it together into a legal document and sign it. And that's how we would share just one road network out there. So what's kind of fun about this job is that I'm flexing those GIS skills. A lot of times engineers will go out and they'll just be flexing only their SolidWorks or their AutoCAD. And for me, the program that I get to flex is GIS, which I don't know, it just seems a little more fun to me. I'm tracing those streams, those ridge lines, really then going back and debating how all this is going to be working out there on the ground. And then also I'm negotiating with those cooperators. As we said, no agreement, no road is going to have that same agreement on it. So you're always just kind of going back and touching that. We both want this road. We both want it to be in a certain place. We both need it to be in this condition, and just continuing that negotiation until it ends up being mutually acceptable to all parties. One of the big things that we might have here is that timber companies, now a lot more, they're not owning they're not a fully integrated thing, but especially in the past, Weyerhaeuser owned their own mills. They would cut their logs and they would send it to their own mill, and it didn't matter if it took an extra 30 miles to get there. They weren't going to send it to someone else's. They were going to keep it. So you might have these areas where we would assume that our logs would go one way and they would be saying absolutely not, it's going the other. So you get to see some funky things like that. Also, like when we surface our roads, quite often we're doing a certain level to maintain those roads for public access, for administrative access, for fire access. The timber companies, sometimes they want that, especially, you know, if it's really the main route and where they're hauling all the time, they might want it paved so that they're not, again, throwing all that aggregate off the side of the road. But a lot of times, some of their smaller roads or things that might only reach less of their land, they might be okay with having a gravel surface. And so how are we going to account for, we need the road in a different condition than you need the road? And those negotiations as well are always like fun, interesting, and a great thing to just kind of keep talking until we get to yes. So Yeah, okay, I'm at 35, we're doing good. So that was kind of the Forest Service half. Now PSU, let knowledge serve the city. So why should you guys care about Forest Service? Some of the big ones here, almost a lot of the West relies on Forest Service for their drinking water. Portland, we have the Bull Run watershed that's within the Mount Hood National Forest. Like a lot of Western cities rely on the forest to provide that drinking water. Additionally, Oregon is still a very heavy timber and lumber economy, or at least a part of the economy is very strongly associated with that lumber products. With our recreation, when we go out on the weekends, if we're hiking in the gorge, if we're hiking at St. Helens, if we're going into the wilderness, those are all going to be largely on Forest Service, if not entirely. And if we're going skiing in the winter, all 4 Mount Hood resorts, Hoodoo, Willamette Pass, and Mount Bachelor, just for the ones that I looked up closest to where we are now, are all Forest Service lessees. So we're really making sure that we can try to balance that out. With our conservation, we are some of the last places where endangered species can actually live free from human influence. So we're really trying to make sure that we are protecting that habitat and restoring it where we can. So now for the compare and contrast. When we're looking at our transportation planning, we kind of did a quick walk through that. In both Forest Service and urban and regional planning, we want to get that appropriate access to the land. These were kind of my ideas on the contrast. Feel free to, we can make this a little more interactive here. I'll pause at the end of this one, but in Forest Service, not a lot of people live on the forest. It's not a lot of people's every day that they're going to drive that same road. Whereas somebody lives or works on almost every road in urban and regional planning. There's a very, very clear benefit to leaving some land that has no access for us. That's our wilderness, that's our roadless areas. We have been made very clear that that habitat should be preserved as best possible. But in urban and regional, that might be a park, but we still need access to the park. Businesses, workplaces, homes, all need that daily access so that you can actually use this land effectively in an urban setting. We have a lot of places where we might have a canyon, and it's really hard to have that redundant road system off of a canyon. We'll have kind of that lollipop that goes up, and that's about it. So we might have emergency access through helicopters, maybe through hiking trails up and over the top, but you're not going to be able to get even a high clearance truck up and over the top of the ridge. If it washes out at the bottom, we're going to be hiking you out, we're going to be flying you out, we're going to be doing something else. But we can do that because there's not people living there, there's not businesses there. So, and most likely, it's not going to be happening and affecting a large number of people. And we're going to be overall using the AASHTO low volume road designs for trailer equipment and access. And that really is like unpaved most of the time, whereas in cities we were using AASHTO, NACTO, city and state very specific guidance that was a lot more flowery as opposed to just kind of a specification. So I want to take a pause for a second if anybody has any other ideas of the contrast portion of how these might be a little.
One thing I've been thinking about, and maybe it fits in here, is climate resiliency. And thinking through sort of the more extreme weather that's because of climate crisis, etc. And I would expect that the Forest Service is going to affect your work a lot more. I mean, it definitely affects urban and regional areas too, but curious how you're thinking about that.
Oh, entirely. This is something that's kind of working its way through, but as we are having some of those blowouts and failures that we showed at the beginning, some of our programs will only give us enough funding to put back what was there. And forests now are starting to ask those questions of, could we take that funding and find some way to augment it, find some way to add to it? Because if we just put back that same pipe, it's gonna get blown out again in 5 years. It's gonna get blown out again in 10. So those 100-year, 200-year storms, especially at elevation where we didn't have great data to begin with, they really are becoming much more random. And so that is something that is being thought about, and yeah, as we're designing that road, is we don't have a great 100-year resiliency plan anymore. And how are we going to move forward with that? Thank you.
I have a question. I don't know if it's necessarily contrast, but I'm curious, going back to the, you know, you have to look back to the checkerboard pattern of, you know, and the land that's owned by the timber companies, for example, and how different would your roadways be if you weren't accommodating their vehicles and their access? But the Forest Service does lease out some land for timber as well, right? Or
yeah, so we are managing our timber for most all of our land is still managed for timber in some manner. Again, in old growth areas, we're not touching it. You know, we might by like a stream or something, if it gets burnt over, we might take a few of those logs out so that it doesn't just all wash into a road beneath it, or that it doesn't all just fall into the next river. But I would say that overall, that's not a huge change in those areas. Because where there's going to be a spur route or a small thing, it wouldn't be a huge, that 1/4 mile road segment, I don't think is usually the big impact on the forest. And that's usually what we're kind of doing, is we agree on the main lines and then we build little spurs off of it and give each other easement over ourselves. So it might be some reduction, definitely, where just, you know, there's some areas where we have almost scrubland out in the east, where we have a large network because we have those easements and agreements. So maybe there would be some changes there, but on the grand whole, we also built those roads in the 50s and 60s anyways for timber harvest. So. I also had a compare slide. But for here, there's always going to be those public comments and interest. We are a public agency. So Forest Service is always getting from 1,000 Friends of Oregon, from a lot of different people, from timber companies, saying, hey, these plans, even our transportation plans, really need to be updated in certain ways. We always call those different uses kind of a dynamic tension. And so I think that there is that same tension in urban and regional planning between our different modes and different users. And I guess that's the sort of thing, is that sometimes I don't see that tension as super dynamic, but also sometimes it is super dynamic, of maybe places we'll take and we'll use certain streets as freight routes and certain streets as bike routes. We both have those same budgetary constraints, and we're both looking at those mixed uses and those mixes that we can serve multiple needs with. So the things that I was kind of seeing of, if we're looking at urban and regional transportation planning, what could we take from Forest Service that I think would be useful, maybe, and just to highlight, because I do think that these overall have the same goals and processes, but just what gets highlighted kind of is a little different. And so what I've seen highlighted more in Forest Service is that dynamic tension, acknowledging and saying, here's how these two are going to work together, and here's how they would conflict. So here's how we're going to deal with that there, and being very straightforward, honest, and open about that. The question of, is it ever acceptable to actually reduce our road network? In Forest Service, we are decommissioning roads that aren't used very much. And sometimes those are in those old checkerboard areas where we have now done a land exchange and acquired road. But we will be reducing road. Is it ever acceptable to go and take up portions of a street in the city? Who is the mission and who is served is always coming back up, because we're always reevaluating. Every time that there's a timber sale or a project in the area, we're going back to that plan, and we might start with it at a baseline, but we are doing a full travel analysis again. how much access does each parcel need? And not only is there value possibly in taking up roads, but is there value in just never having built infrastructure at all? Sometimes we get, looking at the shiny glitzy new thing, and maybe that is not what we need, and actually just leaving that land blank might be a better option. So now for the kind of where we're headed and the recruitment part. So yeah, we have climate change. That is going to be one of our big things that we're looking at, and that is going to be affecting the rest of my career in Forest Service at least, and I'm fairly young. So we are going to continue to be looking at all of our culverts, at all of our streams, at all of our roads, and making sure that they can be resilient and stay where they are when we're getting these more freak storms and more frequent downpours. We have wildfire that continues to go and continues to get hotter and more intense. So we need to make sure that we're keeping that access for our heavy equipment, those bulldozers, those buncher fellers, there we go. Feller bunchers, there we go, that was the one. That go in there and help make those fuel breaks. We need to make sure that the roads are in good condition and that they could be used as fire breaks themselves. We need to make sure that we continue to have that resiliency. We need to rebuild what we need. And sometimes that might be just, we need it open quickly and we need to put back what was there. But sometimes it might be that more thoughtful process of making sure that we are truly building that resiliency. And the last one that we actually came up with in the transportation group was the electrification. We're supposed to be electrified as a government fleet in the 2030s, I believe. So we have not that long to get there, but the F-150 Lightning is way heavier than our current, Ford Ranger F-150 internal combustion trucks. So how are we going to make sure that the roads can handle that weight? And also, we own a lot of the land around 26, around 84, around Snoqualmie Pass. How are we going to make sure that chargers can get put in for the entire traveling public if it's going over our land? How are we going to be negotiating with those departments of transportation? So if this sounds fun, fs.usda.gov/working-with-us-careers, also usajobs.gov. And our specific recruitment for up here in Portland area is sm.fs.r6recruit@usda.gov. I know that is boring and a bunch of letters for a lot of people. So write a federal resume if you are interested in this. This overall means like include your hours worked in certain positions, how long you were working there, or like in months and everything. I'm not going to go through the whole one. That's a whole process unto itself. But then also, if we're selecting our positions, overall, if you're watching this and you're an undergrad and you're thinking about something, you're going to be looking at probably a 5 or a 7 as your GS scale when you start. So all of our jobs are organized in the GS scale. So you'd be looking at a 5 or a 7 as the entry level. With a master's degree, you'd probably be looking closer to a 9. And that was all that I had. I did realize I didn't put a badge on the last one.
We have some questions online, but I'll go in the room first. If there's anything. Yeah.
Question. In your job like day-to-day, how often do you actually get to go into the forest, like outside?
So I work for the regional office, so a lot less. But especially those people who are going to be entry level, if you're entering on a unit, you're going into the field frequently, probably at least on a weekly basis.
Okay, great. I have questions too, but I'm gonna cover some of our online questions. We've got over 30 people or so watching us virtually, so thank you. Question about how much is the Forest Service thinking about wildlife crossings, bridges, and underpasses for the roads, particularly to reduce animal collisions?
Yeah. We are normally going to be partners in that style of development. Again, a lot of our Forest Service roads are going to be gravel, dirt, single lane or fairly narrow 2-lane. So a lot of those places where you would be driving 25, 30 miles an hour anyways, and so you'd probably be able to react to wildlife. Where I see that coming up more is a lot more on those US highways, those freeways, those even large county or state roads. And so I would definitely anticipate that we are working with our partners and making sure that those can happen. But those aren't necessary, we're not the lead on that project because it's not over our facility.
Yeah, I guess so. You did mention early on fish culverts. So if we're thinking about aquatic wildlife, I guess that's a little different. Those aren't collisions.
Yeah,
That would have happened, but that, I mean, that's another.
that's another wildlife passage, yeah.
Yeah.
And so we're opening up for aquatic life more.
Question, you had you talked about signs and warning signs and sort of what people should expect, et cetera. And one person viewing was asking about like warning signs for steep drop-offs or heights that would be unexpected in an area like this. Is that something that you think of? I mean, it's a safety issue, but also for people who have a fear of heights.
It's something that we think of. It's something that we have in one of our design guides as well. When do we put up guardrail? Because that's also a thing of when we're in mountains in the west here, that's half of our roads are just they're kind of pinned to the side of the mountain. So how big of a risk does it need for guardrail? And that is, it's still a little fluffy, but we do have that guidance and we go back to that and we do think about that. How are we going to make sure that we can keep people safe from just being hit with a cliff and kind of that heart attack gasp?
I think that relates to something I was thinking about when you had that, you know, traffic sign with no traffic signs or whatever it had. Because you hear occasionally these stories of people who were like only on their GPS to direct them and they end up on maybe a Forest Service road or something like it. And it doesn't necessarily end well because they're not aware. So are you like more warning signs at the beginning of these roads, or is that something that your agency is thinking about?
It's been thought about. We're also thinking of trying to convince Google that when I-90 is closed because WashDOT can't keep Smoke-Colony Pass open, don't send them over Stampede Pass. That like we are not plowing that road ever. So, and it's at a higher elevation and a worse quality road. So there is some amount of, yes, we are thinking about that. And there's some amount too of sometimes when those GPSs are telling you to go that way is a really bad idea. And it's something that it can be hard to anticipate that the computer will tell people that that is the safe route when.
That's probably a better solution, is to not have the GPS send people there in the first place.
Fingers crossed. But we are thinking about, yeah, those signages. A big thing there though too is that the snowpack when you get up that elevation can get really deep. So a lot of these roads, we close them with a gate. You know, it might be 8 foot, 10 foot tall. That person to get past that gate drove over it and did not notice because they were just on that thick of snow and didn't realize it. So like that has happened, that people will drive over our gates and not realize that they are in now what is closed. So it does become that challenge just because of those environmental conditions that you don't think about as much when you're in the valley.
Another question online, you may not know the answer to this, but I'll ask it. Has there been research into more holistic logging, which works with the ecosystem, like how there are developments in holistic agriculture that works with the ecosystem?
I can't give a super detailed answer on that yet, but no, a lot of our timber sales right now are thins, where we are kind of just doing a fuel reduction for fire, but we're trying to leave some of those mother trees, some of those larger trees on the landscape because we don't want to do clear cuts. And the Forest Service in Region 6 really hasn't. I don't see many timber sales go up. I don't monitor the timber sales every day, but when I do see timber sales go up, it's much less likely for it to be a large number from a small area that would indicate a clear cut. Or like you'll see a logging map and it'll have pockets around, so that they are trying to just take only small amounts of wood from different areas, bring it back together. So I know that that's happening. I couldn't give us numbers on what our percentages are of anything, sorry.
A little beyond your realm. I had noted, I found it interesting that, like, thinking forward to EVs in this environment. And you mentioned, charging network and the weight of the vehicles. I would also imagine a lot of Forest Service lands have extreme cold, for example, which will be a challenge. Have a question from a viewer about the potential for biomass electric generation to actually fuel the charging infrastructure in the forest. So in other words, is there a potential to actually use biomass from the forest to generate the electricity for recharging? Thinking.
I don't know if that's being considered in a serious manner of making those small plants around or anything, but I do know that especially as you get out east, some of the older communities where there might still be a national forest, that this is the sort of thing like, I remember reading in an Inside the Forest Service bulletin a year ago, that like North Carolina has still wood-fired power plants. So we are thinking about how, like, that is one of the products that we provide is wood and chip for power generation. So I don't know about merging those, but.
I just want to make sure any.
Like,
Yes.
Question, I'm trying to figure out which one to have. I guess one thing that I was just thinking about, a lot of this was, focused on roads, which makes sense. And I tried to look at a map just to see for Region 6. Do you guys ever have to also deal with like docks or like airplane landing strips, or how often would that be? Or that might be in different regions.
We definitely do deal with those water accesses. I mean, that's on our rec side a lot. And landing strips a little less, but like there is helicopter logging that might happen if there's a long distance between a road, or if there's just a feature that we need to get around where, yeah, you have to be able to land the helicopter to refuel it to give people break, as well as our firefighting capabilities. I know we all like watching the one that goes into the river and scoops up, but a lot of the time what we're doing with scooping is doing a helicopter down and then landing it at a different site. So yeah, those do happen. Those are a little more fire for that one.
Okay, I'm gonna, there's one last one online and of a different sort. Do you have any successful models for volunteer engagement, especially among enthusiastic recreational users, like Adopt a Mile or noxious weed cleaning or simple maintenance, things like that?
For roads, we don't do that as much. There's just heavy equipment that's involved. But with our trails, the Mazamas Hiking Club maintains a heck of a lot of the trails in the gorge for us. And we help them, they do a cost sharing measure where we, help provide tools, training, support, and yeah, they go out there and they help provide that labor to keep treads clear.
That just reminded me, there's also an organization, Trail Keepers in Oregon. I think
Yeah.
probably does that as well.
Mhm.
And then you did mention that you collect count data often on both roads and maybe trails. We're doing a lot of work here at Portland State on such count data. What do you do with those count data? Are they publicly available?
Send me an email. I don't see any reason why they wouldn't be. Right now, they're a little small. We're trying to get this program more rolling. So we have a few places where we have some decent counts right now, but overall, it is still smaller. All of them are just sitting in my desk at the office right now. None of them are on the forest currently.
Oh, talking about, well, we'll follow
so-
up because we do partner with the National Park Service on their count program in the National Capital Region. So maybe we can talk to the Forest Service Okay. With that, we're gonna bring it to a close. We are right at the hour, and I'm gonna come back up here. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone in the room and online. Let's see, for those of you joining remotely, you will get a short survey at the end. We do appreciate you filling that out because we use it, and we hope to see some of you at our next events. Thank you very much. Have a good weekend.